Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On tonight's show, we have attorney Paul Morantz, who litigated against coercive groups. One of the main subjects we discuss is the group Synanon, started by Charles Dieterich. The following audio is of Charles Dieterich talking over the wire to members of Synanon, threatening violence against antagonists of the group. After the audio of Charles Dieterich, there will be a 3-hour discussion with Paul Morantz concerning his 2 books and his experiences litigating against coercive groups. This interview will only be 1 hour. The following 2 hours can be found on my YouTube channel at William Ramsey Investigates. Thank you very much.
And I keep thinking of the militant posture. Militant defenses, don't tread on me, something like that. And that's what I think is. I think we must do that. I think we must do that. And I think taking this kind of a posture will decimate our population once again. Because it means doing something, which is, doing something different, which is the most threatening thing in an other-directed society, other-directed mentality, being at all eccentric. And I think it will decimate our population, which will be good. There are lots of people who don't know who they are yet. Some of them are in Synanon, not too many, but they're looking for an aggressive, militant, religious posture, not lying down with the man, and not passive religion, not turn the other cheek to religion, but that is traditional religion in the main. That does not mean that is the only religious posture. Not at all. It just happens to be to have been the convention of the one that broke down. Now, I think we're getting the pendulum. We'll go over to the other side, and I propose that we be in the vanguard of that movement. We've already tested it out in various small, tiny, minuscule ways by beating up the Danube punks, by beating up the San Francisco punks, by chasing the dingbats around with our hay rooms and so on. We're beginning now, most ineptly, to throw people downstairs in Santa Monica. We won't be as inept at this in another 6 months. We will not be inept at all. And I think that we could, without too much effort, get a reputation that will be all over the United States within 1 year's time. Don't fuck with Synanon in any way. I think that's what that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to do that, and I'm trying to bring that about. I think that is is the new religious posture. We'll see. Maybe I'm right. I think we will bring that about. We started quite a while ago with the Imperial Green Deal and so on. We're doing that, taking our best people, putting them into this kind of situation. And it is our intention to do just exactly that. We're not going to mess with the old time, turn the other cheek, and religious posture. Our religious posture is don't mess with us. You can get killed dead. Physically dead. And we're going to crack some bones. Not too many, you don't have to. man. And we're going to react to all aggression toward us. We either think we have a good thing here or we don't. If we have a good thing here, then we're not going to permit people like greedy lawyers to destroy it. And we're going to make certain that they don't and that their friends know about them.
The preceding audio was of Charles Dieterich, founder and head of Synanon. Now on to the interview with Paul Morantz. The book that I read was Escape, My Lifelong War Against Cults, written by attorney Paul Morantz. Paul, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk about this book and your life as an attorney who fought cults. I read the book over the last week. It's a fantastic read, really interesting. But I would suspect much of this audience hasn't heard your name. If you could give us a little background about yourself, how you got into the law, where you grew up, things like that, that would be great.
Sure. But first, let me correct you that I would not describe myself as being part of the anti-cult movement. Okay. A movement is actually what the book complains about, the more accurate description for a cult. And there is an anti-cult movement, okay. And sometimes it takes on the same characteristics of a cult, black and white thinking, the ends justify the means, and led to a period that's sort of past now of kidnapping, deprogrammings, and I was never a part of that.
Okay,
I was someone who tried to educate people about the dangers of cults.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate that clarification, but tell the audience a little bit about your background, where you grew up, etc.
I grew up in West Los Angeles. I went to Hamilton High School. My dream was to go to USC. And there I was sports editor and good friend of John McKay's and O.J. Simpson, and it was a very fun time of life. I decided that I wanted to be a writer, and I thought that's what I was going to do in life, but it was so much fun at USC. I went to law school so I could hang around another 3 years,
Gotcha.
This was like 1967 to 68, we're still talking about, the time of, the revolution, girls in short skirts, and it was just a great time to be a teenager and be young. You don't want necessarily to have it in quickly.
Gotcha. Well, that makes sense. I mean, the law students on a campus are kind of like the big men on campus too, right?
Oh, yeah, somewhat. I mean, there was a certain group of undergraduate girls that always managed to study in the law school library, and when we walked in, we could identify them and their presence by their perfume.
Gotcha. That's interesting. Well, tell us a little bit about what happened when you graduated from USC. How did you kind of get started in these cult-related cases?
Well, you first have to start with, personality. Put it in contrast, in 2011, in the book you read, I was very concerned at that point about the type of movies that were being made at that time, which centered on the bad guys as being the heroes, and worried about what effect that would have on future generations. Although it seemed as fast as I wrote that, the movie swung back to doing movies about heroes again. But I grew up at a time in the 50s that you saw television, you saw John Wayne. A big thing in my life was when I was 9 years old, watching the episodes of Davy Crockett and Walt Disney's Wild World of Color. And all those things had sort of great effects on me. And I remember seeing the Audie Murphy story. If you know who Audie Murphy is.
He was the World War II military fighter, is that correct?
Yeah. And so these were my heroes. And yet I never felt that I could be a Audie Murphy type or a John Wayne. And I certainly wasn't a match for Davy Crockett. although he was the one I admired the most because he had these principles, be sure you're right and then go ahead. And so when the big thing was when Al Pacino played Serpico in the movie Serpico.
Yes.
I must have watched that 3 times, read the book, and it was, I felt that I could do that, and that I probably would like doing that, and that what Serpico did was it wasn't a physical, he's going out and attacking the Indians. It was, he was gathering the facts and bringing the evidence, and no one could make him quit, even if he lost his girlfriend, everything, and so Serpico was sort of became my idol, and it was always sort of in the back of my mind that if I was ever placed in a situation that he was and had that type of information, I would do the same thing that he would do.
Gotcha.
And I guess that the first incident, when I was 26 years old and I was a public defender, we had this crazy judge, Noel Cannon, who was locking people up and locking me up. And she carried a Derringer in her purse, and her name was Noel Cannon. We used to call it Cannon's Law. She even made Time magazine saying that all the lawyers were intimidated by her. And when she locked up one of my clients to get back at me because I ran an appeal to get him out of jail when the investigators had actually cleared him, and she had him locked up. And at that point, I began to do investigation on her and prepare a report to show that she knew that his case had been dismissed and that he had been cleared when she locked him up. And that led to a hearing eventually in which she became the 3rd judge in California to be removed from the bench.
Interesting.
And I think that sort of cemented my personality, so to speak.
Gotcha.
Then I had success in writing, and I'd written a story that was being published in Rolling Stone. I'd written some other stories published in West. I had an agent, I had people wanting me to write books. I was starting to work on a screenplay, and I thought this is where I wanted to go in life.
Right.
And
that was about Jan and Dean, right? Jan and Dean?
Yeah, about Jan and Dean.
Gotcha.
And so then the strange thing happens is that through a Skid Row alcoholic named T.B. Renfro makes a phone call from Golden State Manor to a liquor store operator in downtown Los Angeles. They weren't allowed, the Skid Row alcoholics, to use the phones, but one nurse let him make a call, and he said to the operator that I'm being held prisoner here. He called my brother, and I managed to get hold of a nurse at the place, and
right.
She confirmed to me that there was a whole series of Skid Row alcoholic people that she believed there was no reason for them to be there. It was a mental ward, and that they had been brought strangely by this man named Weldon. She had done a little investigation and found out that they arrived the same day that they left prison for drinking.
Interesting.
So I thought they were probably there on probation. I just didn't understand it. On probation, a judge can say, instead of a jail or for a shorter jail sentence, you agree to go spend time in a nursing home. But that's still voluntary. They can still walk out. It just would mean they'd be breaking the conditions of probation, and they could be sentenced. But I figured it was something that probably everyone involved didn't really understand. I wasn't really ready to think that people could kidnap Skid Row alcoholics to make money off of them. It just didn't seem like that was a likely thing.
Right.
But then the thing that changed, I guess, the course of my life was the next Saturday. There was a story in the LA Times. They arrested X-ray operator, a guy that does portable X-rays at nursing homes, because he hired a hitman to assassinate the administrator at Ranchos Los Amigos. And the reason for that is that the administrator was going to testify that the X-ray lab portable guy was trying to bribe him to send certain long-term patients to certain nursing homes.
Gotcha.
And when I thought, wow, if that's going on in that industry, maybe I should call back that nurse again. And I was to spend about 2.5, 3 months pretty intensely researching, finding former employees at the nursing home. I finally found a bookkeeper who, for her own safety, kept copies of the payoff checks to the capper who brought the bodies to the nursing homes, where they were being filled with Thorazine. And when I finally had it all put together and knew exactly what was going on, that there was this conspiracy to kidnap Skid Row alcoholics to fill the beds so they could collect the money from Medi-Cal, Medicare, and Social Security, I knew that once I went down for my one client, T.B. Renfro, to get him out, that they'd let all the others out and that they would destroy the records. So I took everything to the health department and laid it all out for them. And they said, what do you want us to do? And I said, I want you to come with me when I go to get my client out, because you have the power to grab the records before they destroy them.
Right.
And so that was the start. And so for 2.5 years, I was involved in that case. I had Skid Row alcoholics living in my apartment at times when their depositions were taken to make sure they stayed sober. I sort of became their babysitter. And when that case was over, I was sort of a local celebrity, not a national celebrity, but a local celebrity. You know, I was known to the health department. I was known to the county council. I attended many hearings. And so I had a lot of people sort of believing in me.
Gotcha.
But I thought that was my last of it. I thought, okay, I did my Serpico thing. You know, they could not make me go away. 8 law firms. You know, I battled the case and I exposed the nursing home industry. When T.B. Renfro, my client, died, he was on the front page of the LA Times as a Skid Row alcoholic who launched the biggest investigation into the nursing home industry in its history. So I felt, well, I've done that, did that, and now go back to my writing career. And about that time, I had Jan and Dean now was being, made to a movie in CBS. So I got my into Hollywood, so to speak, because you can't really sell until you sold. It's kind of a hard circle, but now I had pierced it. And I met a woman that I thought I was going to marry, had 2 kids, and so I saw my life as being pretty well set. And I probably was going to leave law. I wanted to sell the next screenplay or write a book, something to just give me a little more security and confidence, because I wanted to raise these kids and marry this woman, and so I couldn't go back to, writing in some apartment, selling magazine stories, like the Rolling Stone that did not really pay the bills,
Right.
Unless you went on a staff, and I don't think I would have wanted to do that. So I took a job at a law firm and was living a pretty normal life and thinking probably that that's what I wanted. Meanwhile, in 1976, I think it was, this woman, Frances, met Ed visiting from Los Angeles and Georgia. Ed worked from Western Union. Now, Western Union, for all the youth out there, this was long before the internet and email.
Right.
People sent messages, believe it or not, by Western Union. It's long ago, past history. It'd be like getting the original printing press.
Right.
But Western Union was still going in '76, and he fell in love with her and married her, brought her back to Los Angeles. And she had some history of emotionalism after she broke up with a boyfriend, and now she lost a job, and she was having unfounded fears about her husband, and he might want to leave her, that she wasn't holding up the marriage. She had unfounded fears that something bad was happening to her parents. She was becoming moot and sitting in a chair while they're all watching Laker game. Tears were rolling down her cheeks. And Ed decided to take her to the UCLA neuropsychiatric the next day when he got off work. But in the morning, he dropped her off at Venice Family Planning Center to see if she could get a tranquilizer. Venice does not apply tranquilizers. It is strictly birth control advice. And the person there, husband was a donor lawyer to Synanon, and she said, why don't you go to Synanon? Maybe they can help you.
Gotcha.
And she took a taxi cab ride. And as she said, going up the steps, that someone said to her, don't go in there, you'll never come out. But she went in, and she went upstairs, and she answered a few questions. Do you want Synanon's help? Yes. Will you do what we said? Yes. And then they came up, and she had waist-long hair, and they shaved it all off, bald.
Wow.
And then they took her by the wrist into an apartment across the street, and the next morning put her in a bus to Marin County.
Right.
When she'd ask for her husband, they would say, well, he knows where you are. He obviously doesn't love you. We're your family now. Meanwhile, they called the husband, and he was coming down there, and he was being told he wouldn't be allowed to see her, and males gathered around the desk and sort of pushed him out. And he then began writing letters to the president, to the press, to senators, went to the police, everyone, and couldn't believe it that he's not allowed to see his wife.
And she walked into the original Synanon Center. That's the Del Mar Hotel. The Del Mar Hotel, just for people who don't know, is a big building that housed Synanon just south of the Santa Monica Pier in downtown Santa Monica, right by the ocean. Just wanted to get that.
Yeah, it was, I think, built in the 1920s or something like that, and it was actually during World War II, it was taken over as a military headquarters. And then after the war ended, it went back to becoming an elite club for the young and rich to go to on the beach of Santa Monica. Young stockbrokers and attorneys and professional people. And but it wasn't making enough money, and Synanon was able to purchase it in '67.
Gotcha. So this woman was taken up to another Synanon, and that's Synanon. Their place somewhere in Marin County, right? Right, gotcha.
Right. It was a much bigger facility. They were building a city in Marin County. So Ed ran into a former girlfriend, accompanied by her current boyfriend, and he told the story. And her current boyfriend said, I had a neighbor who got all these guys out of nursing homes, and maybe he can get your wife out of Synanon, and gave him my number.
Gotcha. And
so when I came in that next Monday, after spending a weekend with my woman and the kids, there was a phone call. Edwin called, and I telephoned him, and he started crying. He was just crying his eyes out. And somewhere in all the tears, I said, stop crying. I'll get her back. I guarantee it.
And
that was the start.
so that was the start. Can you talk a little bit about Synanon, the organization itself, and the head person who started Synanon, Charles Dieterich?
How much detail do you want?
Well, I mean, just the audience, I suspect, I didn't know anything about Synanon before I had read the book. I knew a little bit about it through one of its offshoots, but I really
at
didn't
one
know.
time, I suggested when the people were talking about making a documentary to call it the cult that time has forgotten.
I see.
It amazes to me. It's like, of course, I meet people who don't know who Patty Hearst was, but it still amazes me that how fast Synanon has, because it was a big story. It was a really big story. It occupied the headlines of newspapers and magazine features from its conception in '58 to its end in 1991.
Right,
For one period of time, when they tried to kill me, it was the biggest story in the country.
Wasn't
And
Synanon
then
like a massive landowner? They owned tons of property in Santa Monica. Isn't that
they were
true?
the biggest landowner, Santa Monica landowner.
Gotcha.
And they were worth in the '70s about $33 million, which just, Jonestown was by comparison, I think, was $6 million.
Gotcha.
And of course, Jonestown occurred 6 weeks after Synanon. Yet history has gone on to always repeat and tell the story of Jonestown, but Synanon was actually far more dangerous. Jonestown erupted within and exploded with a massive suicide, which has happened many times in history, and was to happen, after Jonestown. What Synanon is that they developed a hit squad that went out and attacked people from the West Coast to the East Coast. There was 3 attempted murders, and from their own documents, I'm able to put together about 88 beatings, physical contacts. And it was an organization that had political connections. Dietrich was offered, and his wife were offered posts by our current governor. And back when his first time he was governor in the '70s, and he was, the subject of 4 or 5 books. They made a motion picture on Synanon, Columbia Studios, with Edmund O'Brien playing Charles Dietrich, the founder.
Talk a little bit about Dietrich and what, not just the Imperial Marines, but what they kind of instituted and what they believed they could do for the individual.
Well, let me say something about, just a comment about what people believe. In destructive cults, and it's defined a destructive cult as generally where the people are the servants of the organization rather than the organization existing to serve its members. And usually the leader is sociopathic and has no problem controlling people's lives and directing them to do their bidding. Now, the way that they get them to do their bidding is that they create a belief system or a set of beliefs or change it and then convince the followers, and that's the motivation, or the carrot with the stick. But in 95 or more percent of the time, the leader doesn't actually believe the beliefs. He's just creating them as a sales pitch. And I would apply that to every case that I know of. So
that was interesting that in your book you stated that even though the cults changed, you felt like you were fighting the same person.
Yeah, that's true. I felt like I was fighting the same personality over and over again, whether his name was Charles Dietrich, Werner Erhard, L. Ron Hubbard. My concerns today are over the future, president-elect.
The same kind of personality traits.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of things the president-elect said, I seen come out of the mouths of cult leaders. including saying, I have a movement, I will, bring back waterboarding and a lot more, and I want to hold rallies where everyone comes out and cheers me. These are, things that
Well, those are
cause great
similar to the
concern.
things that Dieterich did in Synanon, right? Didn't he have like attack groups and he used to speak
It's
over the wire or something? Can you talk
it's
about
it's
that?
it's consistent with George Orwell's predictions, and it's consistent with Nazi Germany. Yeah, I would say the first thing to explain about Dietrich is his childhood. He was born in Toledo, Ohio. His father was a salesman, and his mother was a stage pianist. They were upper middle class, probably, but the father died when he was 4 in a automobile accident, drunk. And his mother made Chuck the favorite of the 3 kids that she had, and she was the oldest, and he was sort of at a very early age made into the man of the family. And 4 years later, his youngest brother dies of the flu. We're talking about a time in which, they didn't have the, the drugs that we have today. The flus were like epidemics, wiping out millions of kids. But when he was 12, his mother remarried a very rich man in Toledo, and Dietrich became jealous that his role as the leader of the house was taken from him. And by that time, he started to drink, rebel rouse, and had a sort of a life as a party person, to be the opposite of his father-in-law, who was conservative and religious and financially successful. Chuck tried Notre Dame and flunked out elsewhere, and finally gets a job for the Standard Oil Company, and he Gulf Oil, excuse me, and he becomes a salesman for them and has some success. Marries. He has a son, and but he's just becoming more and more of a drunk. She finally throws him out of the house, and he decides to go to California and be a beach bum. When he arrives in California, he ends up working for Hughes Tool, and finds his way to, when he marries a second time, and that one ends marriage the way the first one does. He's just too drunk, and she's had enough, and he had a daughter in the second marriage. After they divorced, the second wife's new boyfriend, when she broke up with him, shot her, killed her in front of Chuck's daughter, J.D.
Wow.
So J.D. ends up coming into Synanon, and she will become later the heir successor. When Dietrich became an AA fanatic and rose within AA, he volunteered for an experiment that was being done to see whether or not a new drug might help alcoholics stop drinking. And the drug was LSD. And Dietrich took it and had this great experience where he believed that he saw the world as it is. There was no good, there's no bad, it just is. And went through a period of reading philosophy books, psychology books, and then began to speak in those tones at AA instead of the normal religious tones. And he developed a following that would come to his apartment after the AA meetings, and they would enter into a circle and play what would later become called the game. And the idea was you can scream and attack anyone's behavior, and you don't even have to be telling the truth. You can say anything you want to have a positive effect. And a couple addicts came around and were allowed to participate. AA in those days did not allow addicts in because of the belief it could not be cured, and they would just rob and steal. And these addicts stopped shooting while they were there, although later they would go back to it. And more addicts came around. The alcoholic people didn't want them. And AA said they can't come to meetings. And so Diederich stood up at AA and, accused them of bigotry and everything. He made his decision. And his decision was, well, you got AA for the alcoholics, but there's no one for the addicts. So he tossed out the alcoholics and kept the addicts. And at first it was just a small storefront in Venice called the Tender Loving Care Club.
Right.
But when they found the name was taken, when they finally incorporated in '58, someone had smeared the word for their games. They were called Rule Synonons at the time. And actually, they were called seminars or symposiums, and someone slurred the word together and got Synonon. And Diederich spelled it in the sand, and the beach played with the words, and then he said it would look good on the trucks. And so in 1958, Synonon was born.
And Diederich said it would one day be bigger than Coca-Cola, right?
Right. And a lot of people thought that, this was finally the birth of Camelot. And in some sense it was. I mean, Synonon was actually in this history of quest for utopia, it maybe got closer than most.
Interesting.
It got to the tip, but, it's like if you read George Orwell or if you believe in his philosophies, mankind could never create utopia because he's too flawed. And in the end, it will crumble.
And that's kind of how it played out in Synanon. I mean, even though they attracted people like Leonard Nimoy, Robert Wagner, they had their own kind of strange kind of doctrines and phrases that they used for their stuff. They, talked about
every cult does. Every cult makes its own language. Whether or not it's Scientology, Synanon, Moonies, and Lifton, Dr. Robert J. Lifton, in his book on the brainwashing of the prisoners of war, said that everyone thinks they're becoming smarter because they're learning these new phrases and these new words. But he says it's actually reducing your capacity to think because your language is being reduced to small phrases.
Right, gotcha.
And to repeating small phrases. So you're actually not, it's the language of non-think.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, all those phrases and terms. And I mean, he was basically like a human potential. It became a human potential movement, right? From kind of drug rehab.
Yes. I mean, I could go on for a long time about Maslow, who was sort of the creator of all this. But see, Synanon just copied as it went along sort of whatever was popular at the time. So in the 50s, you had the coffee houses and the beatniks. And so the image of Synanon was a coffee house and where people played bongos. And so Hollywood sort of discovered it. Charlton Heston, like I said, Natalie Wood, Lucille Ball. Everyone was coming down, Steve Allen, because they wanted sort of an escapism, they thought, from, if anything, from the phoniness of Hollywood. Synanon was real. People talked, supposedly, about real problems and the problems they had growing up, and it was very attractive. The amount of non-addicts who would come to their Saturday night parties and donate money just kept growing and growing, and Synanon became more and more famous.
And then it just kind of went sour. I mean, you talked about the Imperial Marines. You talked about some of their strange stuff.
Well, it's a lot slower process than that. It's in my other book, Miracles of Madness. I only tell the story of Synanon. It's a huge book, 670 pages, and it's meant to be the most complete study of one group that you'll ever see. I had every newspaper ever written on Synanon. I had all their memos. I had tape recordings of Diedrich, and I was able to put together this amazing story in history. But it was, first the addicts began to use the language of the street, the swear words, and they were allowed in the game so you could, attack people. You were not allowed to commit violence, and you were not allowed to threaten violence. The belief was that that would stop people from speaking. And then also, if there was violence, that the police were waiting to tear them down. Synanon was born in controversy. You had a group of criminologists like Louis Yablonsky and different people that thought it was, the greatest thing in the world. And you had a senator tell John F. Kennedy that it's the miracle on the beach. Santa Monica was against it. They did not want a beacon attracting addicts from all over the country who would then fail and then, occupy Santa Monica.
Right.
They wanted Synanon, gone. And they arrested Diedrich for operating a hospital without a license and out of zone. At that point, using a National Guard armory that was located on the beach right on the edge of Santa Monica. And Governor Brown Jr. signed a bill, Pat Brown Sr., his father, signed a bill in 1961 that exempted Synanon from health licensing under accepting the Synanon argument that the public had failed in curing drug addicts. So keep the state out of Synanon and let Synanon go its own way and find its own cure.
Gotcha.
And that was accepted. There was a very powerful minority view that Synanon didn't cure anybody but absorbed people, and that it had cultist aspects, and that one day there would be a state of mind in Synanon that they were afraid of. Turns out that those people were the ones who had a better crystal ball. But you can't blame the people who jumped on Synanon's wagon, because they had, from the beginning, like 13, 14 people, average age, say 35, 36 years old, that had robbed banks, that had, done stick-ups, that had, been hooked on heroin since they were, 15 or 14, who now were living lives that were envious. And a large part of that was that they had reached an age where they were tired of the streets. They had reached an age where they were ready to commit to something, to get off drugs. And then Synanon sort of made the discovery that, one is, there was hope, because at that time, in 1958, the idea that you could ever cure a heroin addict was thought to be impossible. There was no hope. We might as well just give him his drugs or shoot him.
Gotcha.
And Synanon had showed that, if you put a roof over their head, take away their problems by giving them a bed, feeding them friends, not only friends, but the people that they knew on the street that they used to shoot with are the people who are telling them, don't do it anymore, and look at me, look how I look today, and you can look like this. And so there was, a discovery.
Right. So
Now,
they were able to cure people, but how did Synanon kind of generate its funds?
Well, they had people donating. They had the game club. And then Diedrich was a pretty smart businessman, making some deals on property. A gas station company let them buy some gas stations that they ran. But the biggest thing was they got a stamp machine that allowed them to stamp products. So this was your promotional items for big business. So you would go to, say, a Fortune 500 company and say, here, order your giveaway pens with your name stamped on it, but also stamped on it would be Synanon. And the message was, if you buy from us, not only do you get a tax write-off, but you save a life. And that was a pretty big sales pitch, and that brought in, eventually they'd become the second largest supplier of promotional items in the United States.
All right, so it was like merch or something like that is what
And
they
there were always businesses, and then, as they developed more and more businesses, the changes in Synanon came in 1966. Diedrich actually saw Synanon as a failure. The actual percentages of people staying off drugs, no one really knew, but from what they could piece together, it was, maybe 3%, 2%. It just wasn't succeeding.
Gotcha.
A large part was they were getting younger people. A lot of people coming, on the information. A lot of people came there just to get clean for a while and then leave. They didn't have the same dedicated people that they had in the beginning. And so Diedrich saw it as a failure. It's funny because I don't. I think it was more successful than he thought it was. But he then began to recruit the squares. Squares were non-addicts, and he saw them as what he needed to run the businesses and to develop it into utopia and to create the new society. And for this, he developed the Synanon trip, which was a process that I believe that Warren Earhart copied when he made the S training. The idea that you come for a weekend, you're not allowed to sleep, you use a lot of meditative states, people are attacked verbally, shown to be, that they're assholes, and the message being applied that there is hope, and that is total commitment to Synanon. And so through the trip experience, squares were then sucked into Synanon. They would turn over all their money and their wealth. And it's very interesting, both with Jonestown, with Synanon, and a lot of these groups that started helping poor people. That really changes in them where they became sort of crazy and violent is when the middle class started entering.
Interesting.
And, it's kind of interesting. It seems to be a common thing. But the people from the middle class, some of them are coming because they want the power.
Gotcha.
Who are these people? Most of them are good people, but they're just lonely. They're unhappy. They don't particularly like freedom. They want someone to carry a big stick, a big daddy, and tell them what to do and how to live, and give them their meals and their jobs and their friends, and most of all, give them a purpose in life.
Gotcha.
And that is always a large part of the population at all times in history. That's why we have cults over and over and over again,
Right.
is because you have this group of people, and they do live better and happier in such environments. The trick is to keep it from going bad. Well, in Synanon's case, Diedrich in 1967, he said there's no more graduation. No one ever leaves. This is a cradle to grave. So a lot of people think that the Eagles song, Hotel California, was actually written about Synanon.
That's interesting. So how did the Eagles know? How did the Eagles know about Synanon?
Well, everyone knew about Synanon. I'm telling you, Synanon was big news. And and also there's this connection between jazz and musicians and so on, because those are the people get hooked on drugs. So a lot, musicians and jazz musicians went into Synanon. But from this period, they never came out. So that to leave was no longer allowed. The idea was that Synanon was a failure, and that the only way that someone stays off drugs is to stay here forever.
Gotcha. What do you think that Synanon's peak membership was?
About 1800, 2000.
That was what, in the mid 70s, early 70s?
Yeah.
And what?
It just kept steadily growing each year. In the 60s when he closed it, it was probably about 580, something at that time. But when he built a city in Morantz County where it could be a cradle of the great society, he instituted containment. And containment meant that you don't leave the facility. We have our own movie theaters, we have our own restaurants, we have our own food, all entertainment is here. You don't associate with non-Synanon people. You don't leave unless you're in a group of people that go out together. And containment was basically the death of Synanon. Because now in a world that's contained, you now got George Orwell's 1984. You've got the wire, the speakers, the public address system. But Diederik is now surrounded by yes men. Nobody who will say no to him. And everyone will reinforce his any idea. And no one's having any source of information or contact other than Synanon.
Synanon and the wire.
So
can you explain what the wire was and how that functioned?
They set up speakers all throughout. They had, later they built a city in the Badger Mountains in Visalia, and then one in Lake Havasu. And the wire was a broadcasting system. It was a radio station, and it was 24 hours, and it was in all the bedrooms, all the hallways, the bathrooms, and, Diederik could patch in with a microphone and speak any time. And then there was always your DJ who would be playing news, and they would play over tapes of Diederik speaking, and eventually the major conversation on the wire was the enemies and getting the enemies.
Gotcha.
It was 1984. Everyone says when 1984 arrived, they said, well, it never happened. Orwell was wrong. The fact is it happened in 1977.
Gotcha. And Synanon became increasingly violent around that time too. Is that correct?
Synanon commenced violence in 1974. And I can tell you how that happened if you want.
Yeah, please do.
The IRS, because of the squares moving in, began to challenge the idea that Synanon was a charity and should be not have to pay taxes if they really were running businesses and supporting a lifestyle. And seeing this battle coming, Diederik and his law people, Dan Garrett, Howard Garfield, they plotted together and decided that the way to keep their tax status was to become a religion.
Kind of like Scientology.
And it also, the same way Scientology, somewhat the same way Scientology came in. Scientology came into existence over a legal decision that said it was a fraud to make the representations that it would, of all its cures, that they could only make a religious representation of belief, but not scientifically. And so Dianetics ended, Scientology was born. In Synanon, it was, we want to not pay taxes, so we become a religion. Now, another thing that they did was, now up to this point, you remember Diederik's younger brother dying of the flu and the role he had as a small kid. Diederik walked away from his son and moved to California, he walked away from his daughter. He had never shown any interest in kids. In fact, on tape recordings, you have him just basically say he doesn't like them. And so inside Synanon, babies were taken from their mothers at 6 months and put in a hatchery where they would be raised by the community, and parents were discouraged from ever seeing their kids. They don't belong to you, they belong to Synanon. But by now, you've had kids who had grown up and been 18, and they basically leave. And Dietrich says, well, we spend all this money feeding and raising them, and then they leave. So we don't profit from this. So why do it anymore? So he basically orders, starts a vow of childless to have no children. But first, he says, we're going to take in the teenagers who are troubled and apply the Synanon system to them. And the Synanon system was to put them in the game, make them work jobs, and to strict punishments and a system of rewards and punishments and orders to act a certain way or you will be punished. And they then applied to juvenile departments and to the state and said, hey, don't spend your money putting these kids in juvenile hall. Send them to us, and we'll fix them. And this became known as the Punk Squad. And these kids were streetwise and really didn't want to be there and wanted to get back. And so the Synanon system didn't work at all. And Dietrich got frustrated. He felt they should be respected by these punks. And so he ordered that you could hit them in the face, kick them in the ribs, knock them to the ground, and then just put them in a game to discuss them why they got treated that way. And they even kept logs on it, which I have. I knew they beat up. And then eventually it spread to even the kids that were born there. If they acted out, they could be subject to this treatment. And then if a kid tried to escape, he was beaten. And if a kid tried to steal money or something to help him escape, there's one kid, Clifford Zipperary, they brought him up on the stage, and 4 people were beating him up while it was played on the wire so that it could hear him screaming.
Wow.
Dietrich called it a carom shot that affect the behavior of one person. It spread, and then it was people who stole from Synanon to go out and teach them a lesson. And from there, it was just a short jump to anybody who says anything bad about Synanon, anybody who does anything to harm Synanon. And then Dietrich trained the Imperial Marines as a hit force to go out and get the enemies of Synanon, which is seen as lawyers, the media, or anybody who would say or do anything against Synanon. And that's how it went from nonviolent to violent. Dietrich even announced it in a press conference in 1977 that the rule of nonviolence was no more.
And you got caught up in the violence, right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, we'll talk about that. This is Paul Morantz. He's going to finish up this incredible story about his involvement or his knowledge of the cult Synanon in Santa Monica when we return on the next hour. Thank you. Hi, this is William Ramsey. We're back with Paul Morantz, attorney Paul Morantz. We're finishing up his discussion about Synanon, so he has some clips he'd like to play for the audience. Paul, do you have those clips?
Yeah, it's 3 clips from 3 different groups, and if you don't believe that brainwashing exists, you may have a different opinion. You know, they say a picture's, worth 1,000 words. These 3 tapes may be more than my book because it's real. And so, first this is Jonestown, and the setting is before they take the Kool-Aid, and people are giving testimonials to Jim Jones, and one man says that he will lay down his life, and but not his daughter's. And then Jones gets the crowd to sort of convince him that he should kill his daughter, which he finally, if you listen carefully, he says that she'll die too, and then everyone starts celebrating. It's pretty hard to believe. When I used to teach at USC, I actually found that my audience, it was very hard for the students to listen to this tape, so I kind of warn you.
Father went on and on into the night, his congregation scared and confused and worried. He needed them now even more. They responded often with shouts of praise and murmurs of amen, and lined up to come to the microphone to testify to their love for him and their love for socialism, a love so pure they would do anything to prove it, commit suicide, even kill their children.
How do you feel about it? You may die tonight.
Dad, from 68 to 69, the captain sent me to Vietnam to fight a war that I didn't know anything about. I had no principle to die in that war. You have saved my life so many times, Dad. Now I don't have no life of my own. I'm living on your time. I would die for you right now, Dad. I'm willing to face the front line with you right now. Thank you, Dad.
Since I've been here, all I've seen is the beauty of socialism, and I feel that my life is fulfilled. And if death comes, it's no big deal to me because I've already lived my life just being here with the family. Thank you, Dad.
Thank you. We were trying to light candles, not push buttons.
I'm prepared to die for this family if I have to for freedom. Thank you, Dad.
I'm also prepared to die after 44 years of not being able to contribute anything to this life or finding any point or reason for it at all, and not being well known at all. There sure would be no glory in it, but for the children here, for the freedom, as long as there's one remains on this earth that isn't free, none of us are free. And I'm prepared to give my life if need be. No, I'd give mine in the place of hers.
Would you like her to be drinking by the fascists then?
And hold it now. He walked out on a sensitive point, and that maybe you think about it. They brought up a sensitive question, and you may not understand the gravity of that question, but all of our children have faced this. We went through white nights, so they'll not be hurt by it. We haven't had any child cause us any difficulties by facing this kind of thought.
Jerry, the question would be, if the fascists were coming up the road right now, and we were going to lay down our lives and fight for it, you say you would give your life for your child's, but would you leave it for the fascists to have? What would you do in that case? If it came to that, I would have to take her life.
Fine. You understand that? You understand that? Well, you... But she's so old, she'd fight. How old is your child?
11.
And she passed the age. We fight at 11. It's under that we consider that. She would take up a cutlass and fight till she was dead. Unless it came to an overwhelming invasion, then we would gently put them to sleep, which we have, but they never know what hits them. We are already prepared for that. A people who are really loving and a father who's genuinely compassionate is prepared for all such emergencies. But you don't do that as long as there's alternatives in which you can make a mark. You don't do that unless there's alternatives. All alternatives are closed for you to make a mark against fascism.
Yes, I think you all should die tonight if it's our turn. I'm willing, Father, to stand with you all the way, just like I always have told you 3 years ago. Everything seems and will always be the same. I'm not changing.
You don't need to say. You don't need to say no more. I remember your fight.
I love you, Father.
I know you do.
I know some of my people that others go. I felt like they're gonna hurt you. When they hurt you, they hurt me. I'll tell you the truth. I'm not gonna lie. You're the only father I have. It's the only family I have. I give up my brother.
I remember you fighting.
To you.
I remember when you sang, I never heard him. Sing it for us right now.
I'm going to sing it for you. All the days of my life, ever since I've been born, I never heard a man speak like this man before. I never heard a man speak like this man before. All the days of my life, ever since I've been born, I never heard a man speak like this man before.
Come on, sing it. Ever heard a man speak like this man before? The days of my life, ever since I've been born, never heard a man like this man before. That's true. Wherever in the hell it's brought us on principle, it brought us on courage, and it brought us to the right place. I never heard a man speak like this man before. I never heard a man speak like this man before. All the days of my life, ever since I've been born, I never. Louder, louder. Clap your hands. I never. I never heard a man speak like this man before. All the days of this life, ever since I've been born, I never heard a man speak like this man before. Now make your sound move. If by any chance you would make a mistake to try to come in and take any one of us, we will not let you. You will die. You will have to take anybody over all of our dead bodies.
What you heard was 900 people singing themselves to their death.
It's amazing. It's an amazing clip.
Yeah. Next one is, this is the Center for Healing Therapy, and when people were brought in, they were made to go for 2 weeks every day to meet with a therapist in a room. They don't allowed to watch TV or do anything, wear makeup, and it's called their intensive. And in this one, the patient tells the therapist that he beat someone blindfold in the chest, and the therapist says, but you knew you could do it, you set him up. And when he refuses to agree with that, you'll hear what happens.
Okay.
No, I didn't set him up. Did you think you would play better than me? Yeah. I wasn't sure. I can't be sure of that. Fucking boy, stop it! Don't do that again! One more fucking time, I'm gonna rip you apart! So I'm not fucking around! I mean it! I know you do. God damn it! You want to play innocent right now? No. Well, you better get up and do something about it! Let's hear the innocent boy! Let's hear it! Stop it, God damn it! Say that again! Stop it! Keep saying it! Stop it! Keep saying it! Stop it! I'm not gonna stop it until you get that fucking voice out of you! Stop it, goddammit! Stop it! Stop it! Don't kick me, you asshole! I'll keep that shit out of you! I know you will! Stop it! You don't want to play innocent? No, I want to play innocent! Then you start talking. Stand up! So start talking! Oh, you scared me. I can't. Stand up! Now let's hear it. I'm afraid you're gonna. Oh, fuck. afraid I'm going to kill you. Stand up! Now talk!
Nothing's coming out. I'm afraid.
That's right, nothing's coming out.
I'm afraid of this all the time you're going to do this. I with my brother.
There's the innocent boy.
I'm afraid, goddammit! You hit me. You really hurt me.
I really hit you. I really hurt you. Because I don't take setup. Other people take setup. You set people up. If you set me up, you pay for it. You got it?
Yeah, I got it. But I didn't know.
Now, you talk about all the setups you went through yesterday. Start with Frank.
The point of it is that the key to brainwashing is to get people to confess their sins. When this guy wasn't confessing in the way that they wanted, as you could hear, he was attacked and told that he's going to get it again. And now, at the end, he starts confessing and saying what they want him to say.
Gotcha. And that's a clip from the Venice
Center for Feeling Therapy. Joseph Hart, who actually was teaching at USC at that time, and they actually, when they started, they were teaching at Irvine and recruited a large part of their class to join the Center for Feeling Therapy. The person that you heard attacked on that tape stayed there for 9 years, therapeutic community.
Remarkable.
They controlled, who they lived with, who they could have sex with. They had to get permission to break up. They were assigned jobs. It was pretty amazing. And then now,
cult of cruelty.
This one here this was seized.
There will be small islands.
Second, this was seized by the LA Police Department on a search warrant at Synanon, and after the attack on me.
Gotcha.
And Synanon, knowing they were coming, had moved tapes out, cleaned it up, and they didn't really find anything, but as one officer was leaving, he spotted 3 tapes, cassette tapes, and a rubber band that had fallen behind the cabinet. And when Swan got home, it was labeled, "Don't fuck with Synanon," the new religious posture. And this was the key evidence to convict Dietrich.
Okay.
So here it goes.
And I keep thinking of the militant posture. Militant defenses, don't tread on me, something like that. And that's what I think we must do that. I think we must do that. And I think taking this kind of a posture will decimate our population once again. Because it means doing something, which is, doing something different, which is the most frightening thing in an other-directed society, other-directed mentality, being an all-eccentric. And I think it will decimate our population, which will be good. There are lots and lots of people. We don't know who they are yet. Some of them are in cinema, not too many. But they're looking for an aggressive, militant, religious posture, not lying down with the man, and not passive. Religion, not turn the other cheek to religion, but that is traditional religion in the main. That does not mean that is the only religious posture. Not at all. It just happens to be to have been the convention of the one that broke down. Now, I think we're in the pendulum. We'll go over to the other side, and I propose that we be in the vanguard of that movement. Because we've already tested it out in various small, tiny, minuscule ways by beating up the Denver punks, by beating up the San Francisco punks, by chasing the dingbats around with our hay roofs and so on. We're beginning now, most ineptly, to throw people downstairs in Santa Monica. We won't be as inept at this in another 6 months. We will not be inept at all. And I think that we could, without too much effort, get a reputation that will be all over the United States within 1 year's time. Don't fuck with cinema in any way. I think that's what that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to do that, and I'm trying to bring that about. I think that is is new religious posture. We'll see. Maybe I'm right. I think we will bring that about. We started quite a while ago with the Imperial Green Deal and so on. We're doing that. Taking our best people, putting them into this kind of situation. And it is our intention to do just exactly that. We're not going to mess with the old time, turn the other cheek, and religious posture. We're going to, our religious posture is, don't mess with us. You can get killed dead. Physically dead. And we're going to crack some bones. Not too many, you don't have to. You'll prove a man. And we're going to react to all aggression toward us. We either think we have a good thing here or we don't. If we have a good thing here, then we're not going to permit people like greedy lawyers to destroy it. And we're going to make certain that they don't and that their friends know about them.
That's remarkable.
Well,
what year was that?
Yeah, and it was remarkable, but as I'm listening to it, who does he sound most like that you've been hearing, talking somewhat similar to that?
Well, that guy, that Dieterich sounded a lot like Jim Jones to me. Very aggressive.
Well, yes, but I'm talking about in the recent last year.
Oh, I think that Trump.
Yes. We're going to bring back waterboarding. We're going to do a lot more. We're going to, make America great again by, what we're going to do to our enemies.
Right.
I want to stop the libel laws. It's one of the reasons I'm frightened is because I've heard this tape. And I could, similarities.
Do you know what year that was that he recorded that?
Yes, it was September 5th, 1977.
77, so it was
like 19. Yeah, but this was at Morning Court, in Synanon. Dietrich would have the microphone be played on the wire, be over breakfast, and it would be replayed over and over again. But they would write down summaries of his speeches at Think Table. And later when Dietrich was arrested, they had his Think Tables for all of 77 through to the present. And from the summaries, you can see that this was a constant theme repeated over and over again at Morning Court, what they're going to do to the enemies.
Right. Well, he repeats himself, too. That's kind of like a rhetorical strategy, too, is to impart that upon people by just saying, it's a new, different posture. No more, turn the other cheek. He just sees that over. How long did that tape go for?
Well, I just played you, part of it.
How long is this usually?
Went on. Well,
like 30 minutes? Would he drone on for hours?
He could go on because he could go from subject to subject, There was another tape that they seized called The Freebies Are Over, which planned how they're going to get the money out of Synanon into their private pockets.
Gotcha.
But what's amazing is later is in the tape is one of the lawyers speaks up, and it's like, and talks about me, and so you realize that makes it so chilling is you can hear people having breakfast and listening and joining, saying yes, and there's nobody who says, wait a second, we can't kill people.
Right. Yeah, it's crazy. Well, let's go back. Let's go back to where
we think it's crazy, but it's not.
Well,
it's the way human beings are. It explains. Cults are microisms of larger society. When you really study them, you sort of understand what happens in nations at a bigger level. You sort of understand, why ISIS was so predictable a result from the Iraq War. You understand how people polarize, particularly when they're attacked.
Right.
And I think it had a lot to do with the way the election went. Was the if you look at my book, it was written 2011. It came out in 2012.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, what does the future hold after the economic chaos in 2008?
Right.
The fear over loss of jobs the modern technology has, and the globalization, and then the ability for someone to rally people through social media. What will the future hold? Of course, I never said,
the person. That was very portentous because Trump clearly is playing off of people's fears, and he's a master of social media. They say he's one of the best users of social media they've ever seen in a political sense, sending tweets all day.
It may be, but what was more interesting to me in one sense was that, the media took Nixon down. Bush had this high rating, and then when they finally woke up, the media took Bush down. But Trump, the media exposed him way before the election. I mean, nonstop. I was just wondering, well, who's reading Time, Newsweek? Who's listening to John Oliver? It was hard. But now I sort of realize that it's what George Orwell said and Eric Hoffer, that when people are afraid and they're losing their freedoms and they're worried about themselves, they want someone who's going to bring a boot down on somebody's face.
Yeah.
And that's been history. Actually, if you look at it, it starts before the president election. We're just not paying much attention. Greece has an election, and what sort of neo-Nazis come in and take over Greece and say we're not going to allow non-Greeks in here anymore. In Germany, the chancellor is getting in trouble for taking in too many Muslims. In British, what they did. So there's all sorts of signs worldwide that people are turning, And of course, in Russia, when democracy was given, but without much of a plan, the starvation and the lack of support, is ring this button.
Yep.
And so it's not actually, if you look at it, it's not really that great of a surprise. I just didn't think. I thought the difference in the United States and elsewhere is our free media, and it's the first time I sort of seen it not protect us.
Well, I think that they attacked Trump pretty viciously. In my opinion, they were after him all the time, but it didn't seem to resonate with people. I think it may have actually worked against them because that solidified people's position, like, these people are all a cartel.
Yeah, but also I think that the Democrats underestimated just how much people were fed up with the Clintons.
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, she was a big part of it.
I don't think Hillary Clinton was. Yeah, she's not a great candidate. She's not a great. Trump is a lousy candidate.
In fact, she was a lousy candidate, and what she did most of the time is drop to his level and get in a pissing fight with him.
That's true.
And he's much better at it than she is.
Yeah.
She needed to keep it like, just go on, Donald, but I'm going to talk about issues and
Yeah, I
what
agree.
my
When she
plans
said
are.
deplorables and called them deplorables, that's when I knew she was going to be in deep trouble, because then she really alienated people against him. Half of his supporters are deplorables. Those are the people who are going to go out and vote. She
Right.
just incentivized people who were on the fence to vote against her. So I think that was a big mistake.
That's the sense that the Clintons were arrogant and, think that they're sort of royalty, and they've been making too much money, and I think there was a lot of that,
Yeah.
Hi, this is William. We took a little break and returned to the subject of Synanon and Charles Dieterich. Thank you.
All right, Paul Morantz, if we're back, can you please follow up where we left off and talk about the Imperial Marines and their association with Synanon?
In the tape that I know is going to be played here, or has been played, about Dietrich, he talks about they beat up the Danuba punks and the San Francisco punks and were throwing people downstairs in Santa Monica. They had already, by 75, began to beat up people. In Santa Monica, they took them down in the basement. And the Danuba punks were some young kids who managed to make the mistake of hitting a Synanon post up in Visalia. And their car went running. When they came back to get it with some friends, the car had been moved on Synanon property. And when they went on there, the doors closed and people came out with clubs and handles and hospitalized the kids. And the same thing happened in San Francisco, and things like that also happened in Santa Monica. A kid slept in a van and sitting on a parking lot, so he'd go surfing in the morning. I think he was 17 or 18. And they surrounded the van and took him out and beat him up. Later, two black couples in the same car came in looking for a parking space, and they were attacked, mercifully beaten. And Dietrich on the tape says we're going to get better at this. And so in April of 1977, 12 to 15 people are put on a list to be Imperial Marines. And in Depot Flats in Visalia, next to Synanon's airstrip, they commenced training to become Imperial Marines, being taught by an ex-sergeant in the military, and then ultimately by a Dr. Doug Robeson. And they learn about rattlesnakes, and they catch them, and they learn about Dr. Robeson tells them how the rattlesnake can kill a person. And they are taught that their mission is to protect Synanon and to go out and get the enemies. And then the Imperial Marines started doing just that. And for me, I guess it was the summer of 78, in June of 78, I got 3 kids out of Synanon. By then, Synanon had purchased $305,000, according to some reports, of weapons. Shotguns, 357s, high-powered scope rifles. And when I got this order to get these 3 miners out of Synanon to a grandmother, the father had left and the mother had died, so they were sort of abandoned. And then I contacted the San Francisco Police Department. I told them, there's one thing you should know. And this guy said, what's that? And I said, they've got more weapons than you do. And so 11 police cars Synanon had by now at a facility in San Francisco, and we talked them to grandmother to allow a visit and talked them to bring the kids to San Francisco. And they didn't know we had the court order. And the police said go and enforce the court order. And they said no. And the next thing, 11 police cars had surrounded them, and rifles and guns were all pointed at Synanon. And at that point, Synanon gave up the kids. And now, Synanon's aware that I've done this. Sort of struck again, you might say.
Gotcha.
And, the other big thing is that, I knew that people had to know about Synanon, and I didn't know when I was going to get a trial date. So, I tipped off the media, and the media, was following the cases, and stories were appearing about Synanon. And then in September, I win a $300,000 judgment for that woman, and I thought maybe at that point it might be over. But on September 19th, Phil Ritter, who had been trying to get his child out, and also who had gone to the authorities about forced vasectomies in Synanon when Diedrich declared there was no more children. And he came home, and he was attacked, hit over the head with axe handles. He would have died, but someone walked by and saw it and started screaming and stopped the attack, and they ran away. And when that happened, I knew that I was in deep trouble. There had been a bill to exempt Synanon from all licensing. I'd worked to get the health department in there, not on the drug addict side of it, but on the side that they were taking in people like Frances, who was pre-psychotic and went psychotic because of her being in there, and that they don't have any license to treat, mental illness.
Right.
And so now Herschel Rosenthal was an assemblyman who worked was putting through a bill to exempt Synanon from all licensing. Barbara Boxer was then a Marin County councilwoman, and she had somebody in the county council call me and request that I go to Sacramento to defeat the bill. She was kind of afraid because they were constituents, and Marin County was very sparse in those days, small little towns the size of Synanon. It was intimidating everyone, particularly with the beatings.
Right.
And so I went, and the bill got defeated in the last committee by one vote. So when Phil Ritter got attacked, I knew that if they would do that to Phil Ritter, I was in big trouble because they would want me. I would be enemy number one.
Right, and they had said, and Diederich had said on the wire, he said, "Who is this guy Morantz? Why didn't someone break his leg?" So he had said threatening things about you, probably without your knowledge at the time, right?
Well, I had heard that. People from who had been in Synanon and came to see me, told me he was saying things like that. So that wasn't really so much new news. But a former Synanon lawyer whose nephew was still in there called me and said, "Paul, I've talked to some people in Synanon, and they say that they're broadcasting your address on the wire."
Wow.
And that got me. At that point, I went and purchased a shotgun. I thought it was a very good idea. As I told the LA Times, I said, Synanon's going to try to kill me. And they printed it. And I thought, well, now they're not going to want to prove me right. So this should stop it,
Gotcha.
But I was wrong.
And
it was a very tough time from the moment of Phil Ritter's attack to the day that I got it. Was an incredible 2.5 weeks, sleeping with a shotgun by my side, afraid someone, if my dogs barked, to, go out in the backyard to, jump if I heard a crack. I would search under my car before I started it. I would be so careful crossing the streets. And I remember I told Dave Mitchell, who won the Pulitzer Prize for his coverage of Synanon, that if it looks like an accident, promise me that you'll never stop investigating.
Right. So you were expecting to be jumped or run over by a car or something like that.
Yeah, I thought they would try to make it look like an accident because it was it would be so obvious if something happened to me. It would be like, be signing their death warrant,
Right. And then what happened next?
Joe Musico, who won Morantz, said, he'll blast me with a shotgun on the freeway, but someone else suggested putting rattlesnakes in my mailbox, and that's what they did.
That's what they did. So you walked out to your mailbox in the afternoon. When did it happen?
No, my mailbox was in the wall. I had returned from a meeting with a representative of the Governor Brown's office, Department of Justice, and it was, that's to say the Synanon was trying to kill me. And by this time, a whole list of ex-Synanon people had signed a document about beatings and what was going on and gave it to the authorities because of what they did to Phil Ritter. So now there was starting to be this, maybe there really is something here. And they're meeting with me and LAPD intelligence, which I had just helped with EST. If you read that chapter.
Yeah, I did, of course.
In my book. Yeah. And so the same LAPD guys that had asked me to help them with EST, believed me, and they were there and had this meeting. And I came home from it and was tired. The World Series was coming on, and I just wanted to not think about it for a little bit. And I put my books down in the kitchen, and a few short steps in the wall is the mailbox in the wall. There's an outside, you open the lid, and in the inside of the house, you open the lid like a slanted shoebox, and the snake was coiled in there. Unfortunately for me, I was kind of vain in those days, and I didn't want to wear glasses. And contact lenses, they were just hard, not soft ones, and they kind of hurt. So sometimes I just didn't wear anything. I think that if my glasses were on order, if I had been wearing my contacts or wearing glasses, I think I would have seen what it was inside the grill, and I would not have gotten bit. But because it was blurry to me, I thought it was a scarf or an oblong package. You never would think a rattlesnake. And, of course, his tail was removed, so it didn't rattle. I still look upon myself as stupid, and people say, well, no one would expect a rattlesnake in your mailbox. But I should have expected a bomb. Seeing an odd package in there. I mean, I should have gone down real close and inspected it. And if it was an odd package, call for the bomb squad.
Gotcha.
It's pretty stupid for some.
What happened after it bit you? How did you, you were lucky to survive. How did you save your life?
Well, the first thing is when I came home, my border collies, Tommy and Devin, would greet me at the door, and then they would go out and play in the front yard, so I'd leave the front door open. And in about 20 minutes, they'd come back, and then I'd close it. Well, they heard me scream, and they were coming charging full speed back to the front of the house. And the snake had recoiled on the floor, and so I had to risk getting bit a second time to get sort of over the snake and shut the door on my dogs. And then I used to study when I was in elementary school, sort of herpetology as a hobby. I used to catch lizards and things, and I sort of knew that I was supposed to get ice. I knew I had to stay calm, and when you opened the back door, I knocked out the wood piece that would keep the sliding glass door from opening so someone could get in. I went out the rear of the kitchen door and locked it as I went because I wanted to make sure that no kids came in the house. And then as I went out the back door, I started screaming to my neighbor to call an ambulance, and that I had been bitten by a rattlesnake, with Synanon. And apparently I was in the street pretty much screaming, and people came out, and they laid me down and put blankets over me. And as with luck would have it, one of my neighbors at the college he was at, he had just taken a course on what to do on a rattlesnake bite.
Wow.
And he, cut my hand and tied a tourniquet, took off his shirt and tied a tourniquet, and he may have saved my life.
Wow, that's amazing. That's very fortunate. Yeah. Very fortunate. So back then, that was a big story in the local news and the media, correct?
Yeah, in fact, I remember, they didn't have enough anti-venom at the Santa Monica Hospital. I got 3 vials and then was transferred to USC, which was a snake capital, actually, of treatment in the world at that time. And I remember the doctor, woman doctor, came in and she sort of laughed and she said, "How did a big, strong man like you manage to get bit by a rattlesnake?" And I said, "It was in my mailbox. It was a murder attempt." And she looked at me like, "What?" And then all of a sudden, she heard noise behind her, and she saw all the policemen lighting up the hallway to protect me.
Amazing. That's an incredible story. There's a picture of you in your book in the hospital bed with tons of photographers and guys from the media taking pictures of you. It's a pretty interesting.
Yeah, it was a pretty amazing thing because, it was like at the time, even though I see some new stuff on TV, I had no idea what was going on in the outside world. I didn't really have quite the sense of that this was the biggest news story in the world at this point. And so when they told me that they were taking me in the room to talk to some press, I just expected, a few media people. And when I was wheeled into that room, I was shocked.
Yeah, it was a big story.
Unfortunately, I gave such a big speech about how there was going to be more violence and more cult violence that 2 of the people who were there went to Jonestown and died.
That's a remarkable story. You even merited a comment from William S. Burroughs, who said, "Hardcore Synanon members still believe the media put that rattlesnake in Paul Morantz's mailbox to discredit Synanon. Is there any limit to brainwashing?" William Burroughs wrote.
Yeah, it's become a famous quote. I feel kind of honored. I always remember Chevy Chase's comment on Saturday Night Live.
What did he say?
Well, he used to do this newscast where he was a newscaster, and he said, "Today, Synanon, the drug rehab, has announced that it's Christmas going out of business sale. So send in your checks early to get a rattlesnake for your very own mailbox."
Wow. Oh, I didn't hear that.
Yeah, it becomes sort of a national joke. Another one was, why did 1,000 Synanon people commit suicide?
Why?
To keep up with the Joneses.
Oh my gosh. So what was the fallout from the rattlesnake bite, and how did that affect Synanon?
Well, Synanon is pretty amazing. Dan Garrett, who was the head of the Synanon legal department, who had trashed and defeated everybody, finally he took it over running Synanon because Diedrich was now stone drunk and, was put in jail and everything. And when Diedrich sort of came out of it and found Garrett in control, he sort of pushed Garrett out. Howard Garfield had left just before the attack, and a lawyer in San Francisco. A lot of people believe it was because they were planning the murders, and some people also think that there might have been some conversation about group sex. In December 1977, Diedrich, after his wife died, ordered all the couples to change partners. And so they didn't know what he was going to do next. So Phil Burdett sort of inherited it, and there was an onslaught of litigation with Synanon in the criminal case. There's a very short aside story to this that is kind of interesting, if you want me to.
Yeah, please do. Please tell me.
In 1975, I think it was, they opened the Federal Public Defender's Office in Los Angeles. They didn't have one until then. They only had the State Public Defender. And a man who had been framed by a detective in Buena Park and spent 2.5 years in the federal penitentiary, a private investigator for this new office was able to prove the frame and got him released from prison, and they arrested the crime lab guy who manufactured the evidence against him. And I went to do a story. I remember I was doing magazine article writing, and I wrote this for Coast magazine. And I went and interviewed the very first man to serve as federal public defender, and his name was John Vandekamp. And we sort of hit it off. And then he called me to tell me how much he liked the article. And I said to him, John, I know that you're going to be a politician. I know that this is just your first stepping stone. And I said that I hate politics, but I believe in you. And I said, if you ever need to have a volunteer, or you need volunteers for something when you make your move to run for offices, you can call on me. And he never did call on me. But when I got the rattlesnake, John Vandekamp was the district attorney of Los Angeles.
Interesting.
Yeah. And, so Synanon never knew that, Vandekamp assigned the 3 best deputies in his office. Major crimes went into, they were working on the Hillside Strangler, but now they're working on Synanon. It was pretty amazing, the job that the police and the district attorney's office had done.
What criminal charges were filed against Synanon?
What's that?
Do you know the criminal charges that were filed? Were they convicted?
Yes, conspiracy to commit murder, and also Diedrich was charged with ordering a kidnapping of somebody.
Gotcha.
But the story of how Synanon ends, Synanon is the guilty pleas were in 1980, and Synanon is not only surviving, but they're getting richer. People are still sending money to
for their merchandise, right? For the merchandise.
Merchandise, and they're making money. I think you even had somebody on your show who, didn't die in Jonestown, who joined Synanon after the rattlesnake.
Yes. Yep.
So what happened is that finally in '82, I have to tell an interesting little story. I'm sorry it goes back, but it's worth it.
No, do it. No, your stories are fantastic.
In 1978, Peter Bourne is the sort of drug czar and consultant of President Carter, and very good friends with his sister, who, if you know, was sort of into the self-help stars. And
she was like a new ager, right?
Yeah. She invited Werner Erhard to come to to the White House, and she also through Bourne opened invitations to Synanon. So Synanon goes to Washington D.C. and puts a down payment to buy the Boston house, and the Boston house. This is in summer. Around July of '78, the Boston House is going to be the embassy to the White House, and Synanon then first tries to buy out the tenants to leave, and then starts using terrorism and physical threats on the other ones to get rid of them. One of the people that did that too was an aide to Adlai Stevenson. That he went to the media. NBC had done a segment 3 on Synanon, and so now the media is hanging outside the Boston house. Diedrich and Garfield come out, and Diedrich goes after a photographer with a cane, I think, and arrest warrant goes out for Diedrich and Garfield. And at that point, Synanon, they all flee. In fact, they go to Italy. And it was there in Italy that Diedrich began drinking again.
Right. He was like off for 17 years or something, right?
Yeah. And a lot of people think that that's where he gave the orders on Ritter and me. But then Synanon, they started drinking. So,
but that was in your...
yeah. Okay, so now Synanon sues the owner of the Boston House, Bernstein, to get their security deposit back, saying that he didn't tell them the truth about zoning laws and that they were having problems. And he says, I'm not giving deposit. And he files a cross-complaint against Synanon saying, you didn't tell us that you're a terrorist organization and you terrorized my tenants and drove them out. And he wants money. Now, that becomes very important. And the reason is, now 1982, the IRS finally says, you know, you got to pay taxes, you know, retroactively the last 3 years. And Synanon files a lawsuit to challenge that. And at that point, I get a phone call from the Department of Justice, 2 lawyers, Tom Lawler and Frank Hurst, who were really, truly great lawyers. And they called me, but they didn't know anything about Synanon. I remember they told me later, I actually didn't remember it, they said that when they called me, and they said who they were from the United States Department of Justice, they said I responded, "What in the fuck have you guys been?" So, anyway, they were there now, and I then became a consultant to the United States Department of Justice, and it sort of changed direction. Their case was sort of built around that time, that the money that had been taken out of Synanon into the private pockets of people, and to money paid over to Diedrich's bank account, and to the fact that there was no charity purpose. But there's another rule of law that says that even if you are a charity, there's no absolute right to not pay taxes. We do that on the assumption that you're serving the public good. We give you this gift. So we are making like a contribution to your charity. But if you do things that are against public policy, well, then we don't want to make the gift to you, and you got to pay taxes like everyone else. The United States Supreme Court rendered this case in the case against Bobby Jones University, which was running a college that did not allow blacks to date whites. So they said, well, that's against public policy, so we don't care if you're church-owned or not, you're paying taxes. And so what I said to them, I said, it seems to me like terrorism and trying to kill people is sort of against public policy.
Right, good point.
And by that time, we had the mass of documents of Synanon, which is another story if you want to hear how they were obtained. They were actually obtained by lawyers for ABC. That said, you know, beat them up, you know, we're going to go out and get the enemies, you know, knock their teeth out, you know, all these documents. You know, Synanon kept records on all their beatings, on everything they did. I was able to identify from documents, I think, 87 or 88 beatings. And that part of my book that you read gave details on the beatings were largely from Synanon documents.
Interesting.
That and police reports. And so, since we had all this in writing, and the tape that that I've had you listen to, was you can make a summary judgment motion. There's no issue that Synanon committed acts of terrorism and beatings, and therefore it's against public policy. They have to be taxed, and their case is thrown out on a summary judgment motion. So they made that motion, and Synanon is filing its opposition. And while that's going on, in that case against Bernstein, the one in Washington, D.C.,
right, over the Brown House,
they hold a hearing in which former Synanon members get on the stand and testify that after Diedrich was arrested for conspiracy to murder me, there started an operation in Synanon to destroy all the tapes and get them out and hide them, and to erase references to their existence in their computer system. There was 11 days of testimony, and at the end of the hearing, the judge issued an opinion that Synanon was guilty of destroying evidence relating to the issue of whether or not they were a terrorist organization, that the legal department was part of it and with knowledge of Synanon, and said, therefore, they've fought upon the court and denied the right to a fair trial and granted judgment to Bernstein. Now, there's a ruling in law that exists that if you lose on one issue in a case, you lose that issue on every case. We don't want second trials of issues where you can get conflicting rulings. So it's called collateral estoppel. Mm-hmm. If you have a clear ruling that the person's guilty of this, then in every case that's ever filed, he's guilty of this. So I actually wrote a letter. I didn't even realize that it was me until I happened to find it maybe a couple months ago. I wrote a letter to the Department of Justice that basically said, it was giving them advice, and suggestions on the summary judgment motion, draft of it. But I said, because of the Bernstein ruling, couldn't we argue that it's against public policy merely for a charity to destroy evidence as to whether or not they're doing a charitable purposes or not, and that you don't have to even reach the issue of whether or not Synanon committed the violence. The fact that they destroyed the evidence relating to the issue in and of itself would be a violation of public policy. And they filed a second summary judgment motion on that issue, and when signed to the same judge, believe it or not, had the Nixon tapes before him. He must have thought it was a big deja vu. And he granted on that theory. He said that I've been asked to rule as a matter of law Synanon was a terrorist violent organization, and he says, and there is the evidence for me to do that, but it's not necessary because Synanon destroyed evidence intentionally relating to that issue and has lied to the court, about it. The IRS wins.
Oh,
and that was 1984. Synanon filed appeals that went through the appellate court system, but never got anywhere. And finally, the next lawsuit is for how much do they owe? And the judge hears that decision. He's adding up what is the value of the squares living there and working for free. What is the value of this? And he's coming up with all these calculations and theories to total $55 million. I thought reading it, what the judge was really saying was 1 + 1 equals you don't exist anymore.
Gotcha.
That was sort of the mathematics that he was using,
Right.
And so Synanon appealed that and lost. And in 1991, 13 years after the rattlesnake, the doors of Synanon closed.
Wow, that was it. But that wasn't the last time you had heard, or you heard or seen Dieterich, right? Because you met him face to face, correct?
Yes.
Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, yeah, it's actually in both my books, but it was there was this rancher in Visalia, November of 1977. I remember when it happened because I got involved in June of 77. So when this story trickled down to me, it was really scary. Ron Eitzen was a 50-year-old something sort of redneck type, cowboy living in Visalia, driving a truck, to work and everything. And he had his 3 kids and his wife lived up in the Badger Mountains. He almost gets in a road accident with some Synanon people, and some words are exchanged. And he goes on a fishing trip while Synanon is taking witnesses in the car and driving onto people's farms looking for who this guy is. There were several encounters where guns were pointed at each other. And Dave Gilmore was bragging his mouth around to help us find this guy. We're going to beat him up. And if you ever have anyone bothering us and you want him beat up, let us know. Talk that was going on. And finally, somebody sees Eitzen's wife and recognizes her. And there's a big chase scene, and she makes it back to her place and calls the sheriff. And when Knightson comes back, he calls and gets Doug Robeson on the phone and says, you know, what's going on? And he said, we have a lot of people in here angry and mad. And I says, I'll call you back. And he calls him back, and it was tape recorded. And in the tape recording, Robeson says that, you know, we'll forget it if you apologize. And he says, I didn't do anything wrong. I'm not going to apologize. And he says, well, I warned you. I'm not going to argue with you. That was your warning, you know. And at 12 midnight that night, they came to the ranch, and they held his family at gunpoint. His son Jeffrey, I think, was 15. His oldest son took away his rifle, and Eisen finally surrendered his because they had guns pointing at his family. And then they ordered the family back in the house, and then about 4 of them with rifle butts began stomping on Eisen and said, we're going to kill you. Somebody says, you know, the cops, figuring that his wife had called the sheriff, they said, you know, we probably should get out of here. And he lived. He was in the hospital for a long time, and he actually shared with the guy knew about punks. It was around the same, or not Uber punks, but he shared it with 2 kids who I think they beat up at a fire station at a hospital. So now it's
81 is when you 80 or 81, sorry.
Yeah, it was 1980. Eisen contacts a lawyer named Ed Martin in Los Angeles. Says he can't get a lawyer to take his case. And Martin calls me. It was actually Martin's idea.
But this became kind of a recurring event for you, where if people had problems with cults or some type of experience, they would either through the grapevine or just through research end up calling you. Is that correct?
Probably for me, this was more a situation like you're in a war and you don't leave your buddies behind.
Gotcha.
You know, they had beaten up Edson. You know, they had this man had never gotten justice. It was like a hanging thread.
Right.
It was also necessary for me to say this on, you didn't chase me away.
Gotcha. I guess my point is, Paul, is I was just saying that from other cults too, people would call you for advice or legal services as well. Isn't that true? Not just in
yes.
Okay, gotcha.
Yes. In fact, the Center for Healing Therapy had sort of popped up around 1980, and I sort of put someone else on the case just to finish Edson. But the point that I want to tell you is that the statute of limitations back then was 1 year. This happened in November 77, and now we're in 1980. And so when we served them with the lawsuit, I used to fly up a 6-seater airplane to Australia and take air sickness pills. The one is that what we argued is that the exception to the statute of limitations is if you do something to prevent the person from being able to file the suit. So what we claimed is that Synanon, by doing the new religious posture and all the attacks it did and all its lawsuits and terrorizing Visalia, that every attorney in Visalia was too afraid to take this case. And particularly when they tried to kill me, there wasn't any way a lawyer was going to take his case. So I said, that's why he didn't file within the statute. He'd been trying all along. And now I'm here from Los Angeles to finally see he gets justice. You know, and I think, you know, whether or not we were so right on the law, but the judge ruled in our favor, I personally think he was just so happy to see me that finally someone was going to take him on.
I believe it, and that's what led to your deposition of
Peter. Yes. So it was in that case in Visalia that I flew up to take his deposition. Now, in the ABC litigation, Dietrich had already blurted out about Edson saying that, well, some country bumpkin had, messed with our people on the road, so, he had to be taught a lesson that our roads will be safe. A gun butt on the back of the head in front of his family is a good way of doing that. So I figured this wasn't going to be a difficult case to try anymore. He'd already opened his mouth, and it was sort of a curiosity thing. I wanted to understand why this happened.
Right.
I really spent most of the time questioning him about his past and his decision making, and to sort of get answers to questions that I wanted.
Right, and that's the guy who ordered the snake attack upon you that almost killed you.
Yes. Yes. As I said in my book, I was dedicated to Diedrich because they had priced the hitman at $10,000, and he said, "Why spend the money? We have the Imperial Marines. We can do it ourselves." And with that decision, he saved my life.
Fascinating. Did you have any lingering after effects from the snake bite? Did that affect your arm or anything?
Yeah.
Oh, gotcha. So that was your time pretty much with Synanon. That pretty much ended it. Your contact and litigation with Synanon was that final Edson case there from Visalia. Is that correct?
Well, I also had a case, Dan Ross, who was a member who gave a lot of money to them, and they threw him out. And
he wanted his money back?
Yeah, he gave him $25,000 to take care of his mother-in-law, and then they threw him out. He didn't allow him to see his mother-in-law. And Diedrich was asked by Connie Chung, why would he do that? And he admitted it. He said, well, the media holds us back. He spoke to the media.
Wow.
And so, that, too, was a pretty easy open. So they also threw him out of the game because he wouldn't donate his last money, and they picked him up by the ear, and that game was tape recorded, so we had the tape of that.
Right.
So these were
you thanked Connie Chung in the acknowledgments. Was that just for her reporting, or did you have kind of a personal, did you stay in contact with her?
I felt at the time that we had sort of a personal friendship. And the big reporters were Connie Chung, Nardis Kino, and Dave Mitchell, who were making Synanon their, the thing. Connie went up there, and I would call Connie and I'd say, "Do you know that Chuck Diedrich has a crush on you?" And I would tell her things that they were doing, preparing for her. And of course, I think I kind of liked that I could be at a party somewhere, and I'd say, "Watch this." So I'd, take the phone and dial, CBS, and I'd say, "Newsroom, please." And I said, "Connie Chung, it's Paul Morantz." And next thing, I'd be, putting the phone across the room. Connie's on the phone saying hello. And, when I came back from the hospital, she came out of the front door of my house.
Oh,
now, I would say that I find a loss in some ways that Connie and I have never spoken again since sort of the Synanon story ended. But that is something that you probably know as a journalist, and that I know as a journalist. You do a story, and you get very close with the people. And you think that they're going to be sort of part of your life forever. But then the story ends. A new story comes. You may move to a new city, whatever. And lawyers do the same thing, too. I go through a case, and I almost adopt my clients as my children. And then one day, they're all gone, and you never see or hear from them again. So it's just the fact of life. But I miss Connie Chung.
So that pretty much ends your kind of Synanon adventure, but you had other contacts with kind of some of these other cult events, particularly Charles Manson, Jim Jones. Can you talk about your connection to the Charles Manson family?
I was, in 1988, I was married, and I purchased a couple of books at the Rose Bowl swap meet on Manson, written by former members, one of them by Tex Watson. And as I came home that night, my wife went to sleep, and I was reading it in bed. I threw it up and hit the ceiling and started shouting. And she said, she wakes up, what's wrong? What's wrong? And I go, he was my friend. He was my friend. I never had known it for all that time. because we never called him Tex Watson, and Watson was a common name. I just knew him as Charles Watson.
Gotcha.
And we worked side by side when I was 22 years old, a summer job before I went to law school, selling women's hair pieces. And so I'm reading it, and he says, I arrived, in the summer of '68 in Los Angeles, and I got a job at Contessa Creations on La Cienega. I'm like, what? I was there in 1968 at Contessa Creations, and my mind started racing. There was only 4 of us there,
right.
And so it was a pretty startling thing.
But he had stayed in that business. Didn't he start like a hair business from the knowledge that
he tried to start one. I did too. Matter of fact, when I went to USC, I had an uncle who was wholesaling hair pieces. They were very popular, in the '60s, and so I would let word know at sorority houses and stuff that I could, get stuff, at cheaper prices.
When you met Tex Watson, there was no indication of the future violence. Is that correct?
He was, first of all, he was Charles, not Tex, and he was very straight and wore generally a suit when the rest of us were casual. He was taken to some parties. A lot of the girls would invite us to parties, and because we were basically selling, women, and he would be very quiet.
Interesting.
It was like trying to, wake him up. Hey, you're in Los Angeles now. Have fun.
He hadn't adapted. He was still kind of the Texas guy. And you also have a connection to Jim Jones. You had referenced early that 2 of the people who came to the hospital as journalists ended up at Jonestown. Can you talk about that and also your relationship to Mr. Stone, S-T-O-E-N, please?
Yeah, Tim Stone is the real story, at Jonestown. And, it's funny, because anniversary, we're seeing movies and CNN specials and everything. You may want to ask me why there's not ever been a documentary on Synanon. I have a very surprising story to tell you.
Okay.
But the Stone, was a very liberal, 60s type guy that, based upon that liberalism and the counter, the revolution of the 60s, was attracted to Jim Jones, wanting to help the poor, and becomes Jim Jones's lawyer. But slowly, as he learns things, he leaves and then tries to warn people. And
but he was
meanwhile,
how did you know him?
Well, Tim heard about me, and he called. And in talking to him, it was like Synanon and Jonestown were the reverse sides of a mirror. It was they were the same thing and doing the same things by the same methods. And so we were, in a lot of dialogue about that, and also, started sharing, strategy ideas. And when I was in the hospital with the rattlesnake, Stone left a message that he would fly to L.A. to, help with my office while I was recovering, which was, I thought, pretty nice of him. If I had full use of both my arms, I might have gone to Jonestown. Although I like to think if I had been there, it wouldn't have happened. They were smart enough. See, Stone had a custody order for his child that, just like Synanon, Jones made kids his property. So he couldn't get his kid out. And because he had an order for custody is one of the reasons, and maybe the reason, that Jim Jones went to Guyana, so that they couldn't enforce the order.
Gotcha.
It wouldn't have a United States, order, and he was unsuccessful to get the Guyana government to do anything. So he came down on the plane with the senator, and but he stayed at the airport, smart enough to know that that in itself could trigger if Jones knew he was there. But on the other hand, if he had been there, it might not have happened. Just as I think that if I had been there, it might not have happened because Ryan made some mistakes.
What do you think his mistakes were? What do you think his mistakes were?
Well, one was bringing the media in there at all. You know, unfortunately, politicians, you know, want the media to, you know, broadcast and publicize what they're doing so they to push forward their political careers. You know, interesting, a lot of people don't know, but Ryan was pushing a petition to pardon Patty Hearst at the time. And he probably succeeded in getting that done by his own death. But the media, I would have said, even all the media at the airport, that these guys believe that they're the great man in history. Diedrich went crazy over Time magazine when they did the story on Changing Partners. He expected to be Man of the Year, Time Man of the Year. He had people working to nominate him for a Nobel Prize. The reason he tape recorded, the reason Jim Jones tape recorded, the reason Richard Nixon tape recorded, is that they all wanted to preserve it for history because they were the great men. So once you bring the media in there, you're saying to him, you know, you're going to be unveiled. We're here to, you know, to let the world know. And so that was the first mistake. The second mistake is that when people asked to leave, when they were leaving, is they went to Jones and told him. That was the second mistake. What you would want to do is just tell the people, leave, walk out, you know, just go for a walk somewhere, go in advance. We'll meet you at the airport or something like that. But once you tell them that people are going to leave, and they're going to leave with the media, they know what the stories are going to be from those people.
Right.
And that the jig is up.
Right. And that's what made Jones panic, yeah.
Yeah, that's what made Jones panic. And I knew enough at that time. I mean, the one that I really could have stopped was Waco. I mean, I was pretty angry when Waco happened because up until that point, if anything happened, the media contacted me, you know, government contacted me, my opinion was always asked. And Waco was the point where I sort of realized I was sort of forgotten. A new generation of media, you know, new sets of politicians. But God, it's like, if there was anything I could have ever saved, I could have stopped Waco.
Yeah, it's too bad. I mean, it's almost like the same type of dynamic. People show up, people panic, then, you know, it goes wrong. If
you surround, just like, you know, with Jonestown, you know, once the jig was up, he went down and took everyone with him.
Right.
And, you know, that's what Hitler did. That's what, you know, Applegate does later. You know, it's all throughout history. Yeah, so with Grash, it was like, hey, you surround them, that's what's going to happen. You know, that's what the SLA did in Los Angeles. They wouldn't come out either. They burned.
That's a good point. And then this poor guy Stone, his son ended up being a victim in Jonestown, correct? And you worked with represented some of the Jonestown families, right?
Yeah, his son died. Yes, and then afterwards, I represented
a few of the families in the bank. Wasn't there a bankruptcy hearing or something?
There was a bankruptcy proceeding. I represented the father of one of the photographer who was killed at the airport, and I represented relatives of many of the people who died. And
you ran into Melvin Belli. He was a famous San Francisco king of torts.
That was quite an experience because I tell you, I've heard legends about this man, and I was actually going to see him in person. And on the first day we were there, he gets up and he says, "I represent people shot, you know, at the airport, and they should get all the money. because no one gets money for committing suicide. And he says, if I can't prove that Jonestown killed these people, I'll surrender my bar card. And he put his bar card on the table. I was, and I was next up,
Right.
So I walked up following, the great Melvin Belli. This is a guy who once convinced a jury that a woman in a bus case that her damages were she became a nymphomaniac from the bus accident.
That's right, I remember.
Yeah.
Well, he used to have.
People said.
Yeah, he used to have a pirate flag he would raise after a big settlement. He would raise it in his offices. He had offices.
Well,
right.
Yeah,
So,
he was at that time. I mean, Tom Girardi, I think, has surpassed him. But at that time, he probably made more money than anybody in history in personal injury. So I came up after him and I said, well, as far as the suicides, if I can't convince that Jim Jones didn't brainwash these people into suicide, you can have my bar card. And I put my bar card on the table underneath Melvin Belli's.
Cool.
The interesting thing was that afterwards, I went out, had some drinks with him and stuff, and got to talk to him. And I thought, this was just, so great that, I would, get to do this. But I was sort of surprised that he was more interested in meeting me.
Interesting. That's cool.
And I think that I was something so different because most lawyers, it's all about, how much money you can make and what your jury verdicts was. And I wasn't someone. Mine was how many people I could put in jail and how many licenses I could revoke. And so I was sort of a different, breed.
Different breed of lawyer, yeah. And that kind of brainwashing theme that you talked about in front of Melvin Belli was a common theme in a lot of your cases, was proving coercion or undue influence, correct?
Yeah, and I should say that the big thing was that Dr. Robert J. Lifton wrote this book, The Psychology of Totalism, from studying the prisoner of war in Korea, and I read it. He's a brilliant man, and he's also a writer and has a far greater sense of language than I do. A lot of people, he was hard to understand, but I understood it. I understood what he was saying, and that totalism, brainwashing, he explained, presented one of the great dangers to mankind. That he even said it creates holy wars. And, of course, Synanon called their thing the Holy War. And, of course, today we deal with ISIS and everything. And it was, if you read his book and everything, or you read my book, you sort of understand it.
Well, you definitely cover
the second book with Ted Patrick's Let Our Children Go, the kidnapper programmer. And that told me the story of what was going on in the United States currently in the 70s. And when I read Patrick's book, while I did not necessarily agree with his methods, I remember just saying, I'm in. I'm in for the long haul.
Well, I mean, your book, Escape: My Lifelong War Against Cults, definitely proves that. You also cover so many other elements of totalism of these groups, such as the Rajneesh, Moonies. You talk about L. Ron Hubbard, and some other groups.
You left out Werner Erhard.
And Est, right? That's correct. So
yes.
You definitely cover.
I thought he was the worst and the most dangerous and had the most long-lasting effect on society.
Why do you say that?
Well, you had the 60s, which was basically, we're going to make the world right, we're going to undo, racism, we're going to give women's rights, gay rights, we're going to end the Vietnam War, it's peace, love, generation. And Earhart comes along with a self-help group that he's a great salesman and promotion, and that uses the sort of what I call a version of the Synanon trip to break people down, attack them like you heard on that tape. You're an asshole, you're this and that, and you're nothing, and be torn apart, and to be, and just like in Synanon, to be kept up very late so that you dissipate. You lose your ego, so to speak. And of course, if you pay $350, you're halfway there before you go in because you want your money's worth. You don't want to say I didn't get it.
Right.
And while Scientology or Synanon or Rajneesh or Jonestown have a campsite, and people, it's limited in number. Earhart sought to exercise the world. And in all the others, I never really cared about their philosophy, so to speak. It was a question of brainwashing and control. But in Est, its philosophy was anti-golden rule, in my opinion. Take from others and take from them first.
Right.
It was all right to be selfish. It was, you're the controller of your universe, and if you stole from somebody, it was their fault that they let you steal from them. And it was all right to do whatever makes you happy, to get past the mind. There's no right, there's no wrong. And he actually went as far as that people that want to right wrongs are just wasting time. Well, I took that kind of personally, but I saw the world change at that point. S was highly popular, and it was having an effect on, finally by the 70s, or, we changed from hippies to yuppies, and into 80s, greed is good, and to me it all sort of stems back starts with S.
Interesting.
But somewhat was, greed's okay, get what you want, and nothing really matters. Now, it was the perfect thing for Earhart, because here's a guy who abandons his wife and 4 kids at the age of 24 and hops on a plane with another woman, changes his name to Warner Earhart, in a stolen car makes his way out west, and only reunites with his original family when he's become so famous, becoming so famous that he knows he's going to be spotted and recognized, that they'll find him. So he has to go back and then say, well, you can all be rich, come out to Los Angeles,
How long did he last for? Is he still in? Didn't he rebrand and become something? S became Landmark Foundation or something, right? Yeah.
Yes, after he split to Europe, after the 60 Minutes show and the allegations were made that he was brainwashing, abused his son, and one sister, although I thought it's rather skimpy evidence, accused him of sex with one of her sisters, but
I don't think it's functioning as it once did back then. I mean, it was definitely. I remember.
Well, I think there was a bigger discovery out of the success of Landmark, and that is that, and followed by another guy, Ed Sieg, a guy who broke away from S and involved his own group, and I, of course, ended up suing that one too, because he was having sex with all the women. And I alleged that it was a form of psychotherapy, so therefore he can't do that. But when you went from S to Landmark, what is sort of sad is that, and you sort of see it now, even some more apparent, is that you really don't need to brainwash. You don't really need to do that attack therapy that Synanon did, that S did, and the Rajneesh did. It's like, just get up there and say nonsense.
Gotcha.
And emotional things, and people will cheer, and there'll be a group attachment. You don't have to do all this stuff. And I think Landmark was sort of one of the first times that you sort of saw that.
Yeah, and I remember you wrote in your book that there's a pool of people looking for that kind of self-actualization. So these guys can just get a different group of people every time with, every generation or different area.
Right.
So I thought that was an interesting observation.
They all move on. Now, you understand that Earhart, the mayor of Parlier, took BS training and felt that he got it. And he went to Earhart and said that our community north of Fresno is having problems. Could you possibly help? And he agreed to train the entire community for nothing. And Father Lopez was a sort of leader of the underground, not sort of liking it because apparently, to make an example, one of them kicked the Bible, and this was a very, Christian community,
right, yeah.
farm workers, and they called Margaret Singer, who was an expert on brainwashing cults in San Francisco, and she called me and said, "Paul, will you hop a plane to Parlier?" And so I went. This was in June, I think around June of '78, and it was pretty horrible because to me, it was like I could imagine this is what happened in Nazi Germany. They had graduates spread out in the crowd to clap and cheer at the right moments and try to whip everyone else into clapping and cheering. But the people, if they picked Malibu or Beverly Hills or somebody like that where they're, into the more head trips, they might have been successful. But this was a poor farming community, and
they weren't having it. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of them, they spoke Spanish, and they weren't having it. And as the trainer was realizing that the crowd was getting more and more hostile, he said, "Do you understand that we have a contract to do the entire Los Angeles Police Department?" And when I heard that, I realized, my job is done here. It's time to go back to L.A.
Right.
And
Gates was the head of the LAPD at the time, right? Yeah.
My old buddy Daryl Gates. It's funny, but after this was all over, there was a time I was with a date at a restaurant, and they were kicking us out because they were going to do a comic roast. And I asked somebody, "Well, who's the subject?" And they said, "Daryl Gates." And I quickly turned to this guy. I said, "Are you one of the comedians who's going to be roasting you?" He said, "Yeah." And I said, "I'll give you one right now." He said, "Okay." And I said, "What does Nero and Police Chief Gates have in common?"
What's that?
They both fiddled while their cities burned.
That's right. That's perfect. Well said.
Yeah.
So,
I only wish I could have hung around to see his face. And I told him, when it's all over, tell him that Paul Morantz,
Well, didn't you at one point get recognition from one of the city attorneys for your work in the Synanon case? I remember reading that in your book. It was they gave you a standing ovation. What was that at?
Mike, who was one of the attorneys representing was retiring.
Oh, that's
and I was invited, and Vandekamp was sort of the MC of it. And Vandekamp went on to be Attorney General, President of the State Bar, and he ran for governor, but he didn't win. And he said that he started recounting Mike Carroll's career, and that and he said probably the biggest case was the prosecution sitting on Chuck Dudrick. And he says, and Paul Morantz is here with us today. And at that point, I got a standing ovation. And I really was surprised. I just really was. I remember later the current Attorney General came over to meet me and shake my hand. And then when Mike finally spoke, he said the thing that he'll remember most about the office was the courage of Paul Morantz.
Wow, that's amazing. How many years later after Synanon, the Synanon case?
It was 2000. It was 2000.
It was back.
So 9 years after they were gone, it was, I guess, 22 years after the state. In 2013, Santa Monica gave me a plaque. Cool. But I never received much from Los Angeles or much of anything. About 4 times the movie was almost made, twice green lighted, but for very, very different reasons.
Well, you were going to say, why hasn't a documentary been made about the why not?
I've been approached 6, 7 times for documentaries. Of course, now the guy who's making it is actually from England. But here's the thing: 1972, the San Francisco Chronicle does a story on Synanon calling it the racket of the century. Pretty accurate story. The idea of it was wasn't any drug rehab, and it was all going into hot tubs and lifestyle. And Synanon, at that point, actually formed their legal department, and Dan Garrett and Garfield, I think, as a result and a reaction to that. Teacher named toilets. I said the Chronicle, San Francisco Examiner
back in the day.
And he called the toilets examiners, and
we used to call the Chronicle the comical.
Yeah, well, they sued William Randolph Hearst, who soon has his own problems with Patty running around with the SLA.
Right.
But the real problem of the case is that the guy who wrote it had been fired by William Randolph Sr. for fabricating a story inside China that he wrote from Hong Kong bar. And later he had spent time in prison on fraud. And somehow William Randolph Jr. hires him back. And it turns out he's only got one source. And this is really not a good situation for the examiner. To make things worse, the examiner lawyers apparently hire some ex-Synanon people to burlesque Synanon and steal some tapes. And they get caught and prosecuted and found guilty. And so at this point, there's a settlement for $600,000, which Synanon claimed at that time, I think it was 76, when they said it was the highest libel settlement in the United States. It was put in the Guinness Book of Records. I remember that the next year when I came into it, and I called lawyers for examiner, they wouldn't even speak to me. But they said good luck.
Wow.
They wished me good luck, but they wouldn't even speak to me. When the rattlesnake happened, the examiner wouldn't even print stories.
They were so afraid.
They were so afraid. So they put a wire story on it, and then when Synanon sent them a letter, they wrote a retraction. And now, January of 1978, Synanon purchases $65,000 worth of weapons from Martel Gun Shop in San Francisco. KGO, which is an ABC affiliate, goes on the air to make the announcement. They look for something on the backdrop for the story, and they find a picture of a man holding a rifle. So they put the Synanon logo on top of that, and that's the backdrop. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Today, Synanon, the drug rehab, has purchased $65,000 weapons from a San Francisco gun shop. The problem is that the man in the photo was Lee Harvey Oswald.
Oh my gosh! So they used his picture from the JFK assassination. Yeah. Oh jeez.
So Synanon sues, and they buy stock in ABC, and they send members in ABC's shareholder meeting and ask them what protection does their wives have, and names them by name. And a hush went over the room, and the heads of ABC told their lawyers, go get them. Well, Chris Brown, Chris Brown, real name, and Bob Friendland, like Lawler and Hertz, which is two great lawyers, and they worked super hard. They were the ones who came up with the memos Garfield wrote a letter to Doug Robeson saying these memos on our violent encounters could be used against us. Gather them all up throughout the foundation and bring them to the legal department, and we'll claim attorney-client privilege, and no one will ever get them. And Robeson writes, it's been done. So Synanon thought they had cleaned their records. When Synanon wasn't making responses to discovery, the ABC lawyers were collecting sanctions and moving. And finally Synanon said, hey, you can have everything. We have a warehouse that has copies of everything. Here's the key. Go have a ball. And they thought it was clean, but they hired people who went in there, and they microfilmed everything, and then they had people hired at night to watch it, and all of a sudden a memo would come up, and they'd say, take them down the basement and give them a lesson in manners, you know. Right. Another one would say, you know, prepare to go out and do missions that you might die. You know, it was, so they had everything, and that helped, you know, it was like.
But Synanon had thought they had scrubbed it. They hired somebody, but they didn't do a thorough job.
Yeah, they thought they scrubbed it. Yeah. In fact, that's the old thing. He used to say that his problem was he had dope fiend labor, and they only had 4 fingers. You know, they couldn't do anything right. And, you know, he turned out to be, you know.
Correct, right? It was correct. Yeah. He thought he was good.
So ABC is sort of the unsung hero at this time. And now Dietrich never once pled guilty. One of the reasons they pled guilty was, you know, they had set up this defense that tape you heard was just make-believe. It was just a game going on, and it wasn't serious. But here we had all these memos saying, you know, new rules fostered and that putting it in action. And so they were opening the door that all this stuff would come in. And so Synanon had offered ABC something like $60,000 to let them drop the lawsuit. I used to say the only guy who had a good lawsuit was Lee Harvey Oswald if he was alive. But the trial goes on, and Synanon is delaying and running up the bill. And meanwhile, ABC gets sued by Lloyd's of London, their insurance carrier. And Lloyd's claims that they only had $1 million coverage, which included costs of defense, and the cost of defense has been up to $4 or $5 million. You owe us $3 or $4 million, and they canceled the policy. Synanon was aware of this and filed a second lawsuit over something else, just to say that when you beat us in this one, we're going to run up your fees again.
Right.
And there was the judge made a finding of fact that Synanon was delaying the case to run up ABC's fees. And then the ABC lawyers told me that they got in all the documents on cross-examination. The jury's rolling their eyes. They're not even going to put on a defense. And because they can see the jury is just, you know, it's over. And, you know, some guy sitting on would say, oh, our reputation is important. And on cross, they'd hold up a newspaper, Rattler, death, you know, trap. And I said, well, what did that do to your reputation? You know, so it was a big victory. And then lawyers for ABC from New York came out and went into chambers and agreed to pay Synanon $1,250,000, keep it hush-hush, and all lawsuits were dropped, and no one would ever know about it. It got public only because I broke the news, because I was so incensed. At the time, ABC was making a miniseries on me and Synanon. The screenplay had been finished.
Interesting.
You know, it was just ready to go into production. And I knew that was over with, but it was so dehumanizing that for all the people they beat up for me, they'd pay $1.25 million. Well, the reason that they paid it is that to settle the lawsuits between the insurance carrier and ABC and to pick a policy price for a future policy with greater coverage, they had to liquidate the Synanon problem because they didn't know what type of money figure to put on because of its ability to run up fees and costs in the future cases. And so a deal was made where Synon would disappear. It would get $1.25 million, and the lawyers would reduce their attorney fees that they were claiming on the case. And the lawyers were not happy about it. They had to be fired from the case, and a New York firm took it over. And the jury was so upset that they held a barbecue for Bob and Chris and did it annually for 5 years.
Interesting.
And, so now, what does this mean? Okay, since the time of, when did pay TV come in? Was it 90s, late 80s?
It seems right, yeah.
It's hard to remember, but I told you now how the ABC thing, got canceled.
Right.
And then Showtime was going to make a motion picture in 1998. We finished that script. It was greenlighted for 4 years. It kept being delayed. They only filmed in Canada. And then they all went out of the movie-making business. But meanwhile, there's no documentary. There's documentary on every poll. People know about Manson. They know about Jonestown. We've watched Niche. There's been things.
They don't know about Synanon. It's not public at all.
Now here's the reason. I've told you this whole story.
Okay.
I only discovered this recently myself. I heard that A&E was going to do a 6-part series on different cults in America, starting with Jonestown. I thought, what a great opportunity. And so I was going to make contact with A&E. And I called up their website, and there it was to the right. A&E, which is the History Channel at that time, it was doing all the documentaries, for probably the first 10 years up by TV. They were probably the only station, the A&E stations, that was doing documentaries. Now we have CNN, now we have Netflix,
right.
And HBO, it doesn't
Amazon, all these other people are getting into the game, yeah.
Yeah, but at this time, it was only A&E for years. And there on the right on the website, it said that A&E is owned by the Hearst Corporation and ABC.
Wow, that's it.
That's it, yeah.
So you've installed and pushed back.
Now I know that there was no way. In fact, probably contractually, they probably agreed. Even though Synanon doesn't exist to enforce it. But it's also, I don't think that ABC or the Hearst Corporation would exactly, you can't do the story without really telling you what I just said. So you're going to open your own wounds.
When can we look forward to the documentary that you're featured in? Do you know when that'll be out or the name of it?
I don't know. He did a film, and he's gotten some backing, and he's working on it.
Okay, good. Well, Paul Morantz, I'd like to just kind of wrap this up. Is there any final message or anything you would like to tell the listeners?
Well, if between my 2 books, Escape, it was written more for the public to educate by telling in quick, easy reading the factual stories. One chapter on Manson, the SLA, Jonestown, Synanon, Scientology. That without lecturing, without saying the commonalities is that you, by just being entertained by these stories, will see the similarities and you'll get it. It's without being sort of lectured to. And it was written to be entertaining. My other book, I've actually gotten the greatest responses from, which is Synanon people who say that it's ironic that the man who fought and brought them down has written the best book on Synanon, from Miracles of Madness. But it's 670 pages, and it starts in 1913. And so it makes you experience Synanon from its early glory days to the end, and you go through changes with it. it isn't for everybody because, you know, I think we're in what we call the Twitter generation. You know, people are used to, you know, things in a paragraph or two.
Right.
So, but for someone who really wants to understand human behavior, you know, or to see Animal Farm or 1984 really in detail and in effect in how it occurred, you know, I think it's a classic book that.
And both of those books can be had at Amazon. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And do you have a personal website where people can get copies?
No,
okay.
I don't, but I do have a personal website that gives.
What is that?
PaulMorantz.com, and there are, you know, lots of chapters on Synanon in their early forms are on there, and stories about all my other cases are on there, but they're long, and it's actually better to get the books because it's less reading, it's shorter, you know.
Well, I can testify that Escape My Lifelong War Against the Cults is an excellent book. I read the whole thing, so kudos to you for writing that. And your other book is The True Story of Charles Dieterich and Synanon by Paul Morantz, From Miracle to Madness. So those can be had on Amazon and www.paulmorantz.com. Paul, thank you so much. We talked for a long time. Now we just made 3 hours, so you're my longest interview I've ever done.
Really? Well, the question is how many people will be asleep for 3 hours?
I don't know. You know, my listeners have long attention spans. They're not fully Twitter generationalized. They actually listen to these things. People put them on and drive or listen to them at work. So you never know. You can see.
It was interesting. Thank you very
Paul,
much.
Thank you. God bless. Have a